And so verse 1, it says, "Thus the Lord God showed me, and behold, there was a basket of summer fruit." The Lord again causes Amos to see a vision, which it really doesn't have probably an obvious significance in itself, but whose meaning becomes clear in its interpretation. The Lord's method of revelation here illustrates his sovereignty. He alone can give the vision, and he alone can interpret it. And we see samples of that also. Maybe. Okay. In Genesis 41, verses 15 and 16, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I have had a dream, but no one can interpret it, and I have heard it said about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." Joseph then answered Pharaoh, saying, "It has nothing to do with me. God will give Pharaoh an answer for his own good." And in Daniel 2:27, Daniel answered before the king and said, "As for the secret about which the king has inquired, neither wise men, sorcerers, soothsayers, priests, nor diviners are able to declare it to the king." And in Daniel 2:45, "Just as you saw that a stone was broken off from the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future. So the dream is certain, and its interpretation is trustworthy." And in Daniel 47, the king responded to Daniel and said, "Your God truly is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, since you have been able to reveal this secret." So indeed, the same was even true the same thing was even true even in the parables that Jesus used. And for instance, in Matthew 13 verses 10 through 18, Jesus gives an explanation of the parables. And it says, starting in verse 10, it says, "The disciples came up to him and said, 'Why do you speak to them in parables?' And Jesus answered them, 'To you it has been granted to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been granted. For whoever has, to him more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. But whoever does not have, even what he has shall be taken away from him. Therefore I speak to them in parables, because while seeing they do not see, and while hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand.' And in this case, the prophecy of Isaiah is being fulfilled, which says, 'Thou shalt keep on listening, but shall not understand. And you shall keep on looking, but shall not perceive. For the heart of the people has become dull. With their ears they scarcely hear, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their heart, and return, and I would heal them. But blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear. For truly I say to you that many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see and did not see it, and to hear what you hear and did not hear it.'" So he kind of explains this, and then he goes on and explains about the sower of the seed is explained. He said, "Listen then to the parable of the sower," and it goes on. So they use this as a way of for God to see how these visions work. Verse 2, he said, "What do you see, Amos?" And I said, "A basket of summer fruit." Then the Lord said to me, "The end has come for my people Israel. I will spare them no longer." So the Lord he interrogates Amos, as he did this in an earlier vision back in chapter 7, verse 7 through 9. And as the case is here, also the vision will be fulfilled. Therefore, the Lord is speaking with Amos about it, so he'll be sure to understand the importance. We see an important truth illustrated in this conversation. The Lord takes into his confidence those whom he desires to understand his works and his words. We see this in Genesis 18, verses 17 and 18, and I underlined it, "For I have chosen him." So God, the Lord said, "I shall hide from Abraham what I am about to do, since Abraham will certainly become a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed, for I have chosen him." So much later, when we get to the time of Jesus, when his disciples asked him, "Why do you speak to the people in parables?" as I just read from Matthew 13:10, Jesus answered them in verse 11 and 12, which I had just read, was the answer to that, why he does that, which I had just read. God often uses common objects to teach important spiritual truths. And he uses objects like pottery in Jeremiah 18, chapter 18, verse 19, and seed in Luke 8:11, and yeast in Matthew 16:6 and 11. And in this text, a basket of summer fruit is used. Anybody know what summer fruit is?
Kumquat.
No, that's not what. Summer fruit means summer is the end of the season of fruit. The fruit is fully ripe, and its edible life is now shortened. And so he's using this as a reference that Israel has come to the end of their time, and they're going to be punished. And so he uses the word summer fruit to mean the end of the season or the end of their time. Just as fruit was ripening for eating, the nation of Israel was ripe for judgment.
Bill?
Yes.
I'd like to give an illustration of that.
Sure.
I stayed a day or two in Hawaii one time, and I learned that there are fruits that are only grown in Hawaii, nowhere else in the world. They're called passion fruits.
Mm-hmm.
I never quite heard why they were called passion fruits, but I think it's because they have a very strong taste and a unique taste, and they're very, very, very delicious. But nobody else in the world can eat these fruits because, first of all, they can't be frozen. They will not be good when they thaw. And second, they must be eaten the day they are picked, within a few hours of when they are picked, because their shelf time is 0.
Mm-hmm.
They go out and pick them in the morning, and then people have them in homes or in restaurants at lunch and the afternoon, but by supper time, you're not going to eat them. That's how fast these fruits go bad. And I thoroughly enjoy, in fact, I went out of my way to find some of these because I knew I'd never have a chance to eat them again. They were fruit that lasted 4 hours, or at the most 6 hours, and they were gone until the next day when you go out and pick some more. Just an illustration of how some things are great, but they don't last long.
They don't last long. They come
right
to...
Here, God is saying to Amos, Israel's at the end right now.
Yep, that's correct. Yep. The Hebrew word translated summer or ripe in verse 1 is quayis, I think is how you say, or gaius, something, G-A-Y-I-S, and is similar to the word translated end in verse 2, which is Q-U-E-S. It was the end of the harvest for the farmers, and it would be the end for Israel when the harvest judgment came. In Jeremiah 1:11-12, it says, "The word of the Lord came to me, saying, What do you see, Jeremiah? And I said, I see a rod of an almond tree. Then the Lord said to me, You have seen well, for I am watching over my word to perform it." And then in Jeremiah 8:20, "The harvest is past, summer is ended. We are not saved." Of course, Jeremiah, all these prophets were all in the same time frame and knew of the coming of the end. Verse 3 says, "The songs of the palace will turn to wailing in that day, declares the Lord God. Many will be corpses. In every place they will cast them forth in silence." So here Amos portrays the end of Israel. There comes a time when God's long suffering runs out. In Isaiah 55, 6-7, it says, "Seek the Lord while he may be found, call upon him while he is near. Let the wicked abandon his way, and the unrighteous person his thoughts, and let him return to the Lord, and he will have compassion on him, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon." So this time is running out. God is long-suffering, but this time is running out. The judgment has been decreed. The songs at the temple would become funeral dirges, and weeping and wailing, and corpses would be thrown everywhere and not given a proper burial. This is a fate typical of conquered cities in the ancient Near East, especially those conquered by Assyria. In Nahum 3:19, it says, "For who has ever escaped your endless cruelty?" Assyrian cruelty included piles of the heads and or hands of the slain, heaped up at a conquered city's gate as a warning to others who might contemplate rebellion. The picture of desolation here is reminiscent of back in chapter 6, verse 10, where the command was to hush or to keep quiet, indicating the futility of calling for help. Assyria would be one instrument by which the Lord would bring this about. Ironically, a similar fate was soon to befall Assyria, as the prophet Nahum said, "Horsemen charging, swords flashing, spears gleaming, many killed, a mass of corpses, and there is no end to the dead bodies. They stumble over the heads of the body." Of course, the Babylonians took over, eventually conquered the Assyrians. And sadly, a similar fate would befall Judah, which also fell away from the Lord. In Jeremiah 16:4, it says, "They will die of deadly diseases. They will not be mourned or buried. They will be like dung on the surface of the ground, and they will perish by sword and famine. And their dead bodies will become food for the birds of the sky and for the animals of the earth." It would be a bitter harvest for Israel as the nation reaped what it sowed. People would be so overwhelmed that they would be unable to discuss this tragedy. Silence would remain in the land. chapter 4, or verse 4 says, "Hear this, you who trample the needy, to do away with the humble of the land." The reason was simple. Israel had broken God's law and failed to live by his covenant. The first tablet of the law, now speaking of the Ten Commandments, on 2 tablets of stone, the first tablet of the law had to do with our relationships to God, and the second tablet, the second 5 commandments, had to do with our relationship to others. And just to give you the shortened version of that, back in Exodus 20, the first commandment was, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." Number 2, "Thou shalt not make for yourself an idol." And number 3, "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain." 4, "Remember the Sabbath, to keep it holy." And 5, "To honor your father and your mother." So those were all things with relationships to God. And then 6 was, "You shall not murder." 7, "You shall not commit adultery." 8, "You shall not steal." 9, "You shall not bear false witness." And 10, "You shall not covet." And Israel rebelled against both halves of this, the part of his relationship to God and the relationship to others. In Matthew 22, verses 36 to 40, it says, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And he said to them, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment. The second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Upon these 2 commandments hang the whole law and the prophets." But they trampled on the poor and the needy, and they robbed them of the little that they possessed. An indictment that Amos had often brought against the people. And he's done this several times in Amos. If you look at Amos chapter 2, verse 6, verse 6, "Thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Israel, and for 4 I will not revoke its punishment, because they sell the righteous for money and the needy for a pair of sandals. These who pant after the very dust of the earth on the head of the helpless, and also turn aside the way of the humble. And a man and his father resort to the same girl in order to profane my holy name." And then in chapter 4, Amos talks about, "Hear this word, you cows of Bashan, who are on the mountain of Samaria, who oppress the poor, who crush the needy, who say to your husbands, 'Bring now that we may drink.'" And then in chapter 5, verses 11 and 12, "Therefore, because you impose heavy rent on the poor, and exact a tribute of grain from them, though you have built houses of well-hewn stone, yet you will not live in them. You have planted pleasant vineyards, yet you will not drink their wine. For I know your transgressions are many, and your sins are great. You who distress the righteous and accept bribes, and turn aside the poor in the gate." So several times here in Amos, he brings out this, what they're doing to the poor. When they did business, the merchants used inaccurate measurements so that they could rob their customers. The law demanded that they use accurate weights and measures. Back in Leviticus 19, and verses 35 to 36, it says, "You shall do no wrong in judgment, in measurement of weight or volume. You shall have accurate balances, accurate weights, an accurate ephah, and an accurate hin. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt." Then in Deuteronomy 25, 13 through 6, it says, "You shall not have in your bag differing weights, a large and a small. You shall not have in your house differing measures, a large and a small. You shall have a correct and honest weight. You shall have a correct and honest measure, so that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. For everyone who does these things, everyone who acts unjustly, is an abomination to the Lord your God." But they didn't care. They didn't care. All they cared about was making as much money as possible. In verse 4, Amos here begins a new oracle that, like back in 2:6, is directed against those who oppress the poor, exterminating the oppressed of the land. He does not mean that the privileged are so ruthless that they set out to exterminate the oppressed classes. After all, those oppressed classes are their livelihood. Rather, by their ruthless greed, they in effect gradually exterminate the needy, by whose exploitation they have gotten unjust wealth. The world will always have poor people until the Lord returns. Matthew 26:11 says, "For you always have the poor with you." Or Deuteronomy 15:11 says, "For the poor will never cease to be in the land. Therefore I command you, saying, you shall freely open your hand to your brother, to your needy and poor in your land." The poor and the needy have always been objects of compassion in the Lord's eyes. And I have several examples of those. Exodus 23:11. "But in the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie uncultivated, so that the needy of your people may eat, and whatever they have, the animal of the field may eat. So you are to do the same with your vineyard and your olive groves." And in Deuteronomy 15, verses 7 through 11. "If there is a poor person among you, one of your brothers, in any of your towns, in your land which the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart, nor close your hand from your poor brother, but you shall fully open your hand to him, and generously lend him enough for his need in whatever he lacks. Be careful that there is no mean-spirited thought in your heart, such as the 7th year, the year of release of debts, is near, and your eye is malicious toward your poor brother, and you give him nothing. Then he may cry out to the Lord against you, and it will be a sin in you. You shall generously give to him, and your heart will not be grudging when you give to him, because for this thing the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in all your undertakings. For the poor will not cease to exist in the land. Therefore I am commanding you, saying, you shall fully open your hand to your brother, to your needy and poor in the land." Psalm 69, "For the Lord hears the needy and does not despise those of his who are prisoners." Psalm 72, "May he vindicate the afflicted of the people, save the children of the needy, and crush the oppressor." Psalm 72, 12-13, "For he will save the needy when he cries for help, the afflicted also, and him who has no helper. He will have compassion on the poor and needy, and he will save the lives of the needy." And then in Isaiah 25:4, For you have seen a stronghold for the helpless, a stronghold for the poor in his distress. So we are reminded that Jesus came, as Luke 4:18 tells us, to bring good news to the poor. And that James 2, verse 5 says, God has chosen the poor in the world to be rich in faith and to be heirs of the kingdom that he has promised to those who love him. And that is what we still need to do today. And we do. We have to take care of the poor. Any questions or comments up to this point? Okay. 5. When will the new moon be over, so that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath, that we may open the wheat market, to make the bushel smaller and the shekel bigger, and to cheat with dishonest scales? So he's adding to their deception, or added to their deception, was their discretion of the Sabbath and the religious holy days. The worship of God interrupted their business, and they didn't like it. You might expect Gentile merchants to ignore the holy days, but certainly not the Jewish merchants. And if you turn over to, let's see, Nehemiah, I think it is. I can't read my hand scratching here. Where am I? Yeah, Nehemiah 13. I should have had this marked for a Nehemiah 13, verses 15 through 22. In those days I saw in Judah some who were treading wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing in sacks of grain and loading them on donkeys, as well as wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of loads. And they brought them into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. So I admonished them on the day, and they sold food. Also, men of Tyre were living there who imported fish and all kinds of merchandise and sold them to the sons of Judah on the Sabbath, even in Jerusalem. Then I reprimanded the nobles of Judah and said to them, "What is this evil thing you are doing by profaning the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers do the same, so that our God brought on us and on this city all his trouble? Yet you are adding to the wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath." It came about that just as it grew dark at the gates of Jerusalem before the Sabbath, I commanded that the doors should be shut, and that they should not open them until after the Sabbath. Then I stationed some of my servants at the gate so that no load would enter on the Sabbath day. Once or twice the traders and merchants of every kind of merchandise spent the night outside Jerusalem. Then I warned them and said to them, "Why do you spend the night in front of the wall? If you do so again, I will force against you." From that time on, they did not come on the Sabbath. And I commanded the Levites that they should purify themselves and come as gatekeepers to sanctify the Sabbath day. For this also, remember me, O my God, and have compassion on me according to the greatness of your loving kindness. So they're back to their thing. They're Sabbath days and holy days are now, is a hindrance to their business and their money making. The poor were unable to pay for the necessities of life, and had to go into servitude to care for their families, and the merchants would have them arrested for the least little offense, even their inability to pay for a pair of shoes. These evil doers would not only alter their weights and measures and inflate their prices, but they would also cheapen their product by mixing the sweepings of the threshing floor with the grain. You didn't get pure grain. You got the chaff as well. Chaff or shaft? How do you want it? Chaff. Chaff. I know it. I just as First Timothy says, 1 Timothy 6:10 says, "For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil." The oppressing classes of Amos's day could not wait for the holidays to be over so that they could again go about the business of getting gain for themselves at the expense of the poor. The people could not engage in business on the new moon or the Sabbath. The oppressors whom Amos addressed observed the law by keeping its stipulations regarding these holidays, but they failed to observe the heart of the law by continuing to disregard the plight of the poor and the helpless among them. Amos also says that they weighted the shekel, a standard weight equals it's 2/5 of an ounce, or 11.5 grams. These merchants used shekels heavier than the standard. The shekels were placed in one bowl and the customer's silver in the other, the balance scale in the other. So against the merchants' illegally heavy shekels, the customers would pay out more than they should, and as I said before, with diluted product. The deception could go even further. In later in history, in excavations at Tirzah, Tirzah, it was the capital city of the northern kingdom back during the time of Jeroboam I until the time of Omri. We can find that back in 1 Kings. Anyway, the shops from the 8th century were found with 2 sets of weights, one for buying and one for selling. So they have proof of this. Anything? Verse 6. So as to buy the helpless for money, and the needy for a pair of sandals, and that we shall sell the refuge of the wheat. So this verse concludes a short portrayal of the injustice that was rampant throughout Israel. The net effect of the people's deceit is that the poor and needy must pay the going rate for diluted goods, and there become so impoverished that they must sell themselves to the very ones who have impoverished them. The Mosaic covenant provided for slavery in Leviticus 25, verses 39 to 43. I was going to read that, but I'm not going to. But it's obvious from the context that the privileged of Israel had no concern for the law or any other, except the law of self-grandizement of themselves, to make greater in power and wealth and honor, which they had laid down for themselves. It's probably a good place to stop. Anybody got any questions or comments so far? Yeah, Tom? Mm-hmm.
And what a heavy burden he lays on the leadership of people who take advantage of individuals who are in a poor state. And, so I guess no matter where you are, whatever you're dealing with,
Right.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many times you hear it. You just keep doing what you want to do, what's good for you, and ignoring what God's expectations are.
And it's still true today.
That's what it is.
I mean, nothing has changed.
Nothing's changed.
That's right, unfortunately. Okay, any other comments? Thank you. We'll pick up next week right here.